Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I am glad you could join me today, and if you are not already a subscriber, make sure you follow and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And don't forget to visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with others, because people need to be informed about what is really going on. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I've been harping on the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism for the last 3 years. It's been 3 years since the Biden administration unveiled the national strategy. This is something I routinely talk about, even though in most other places, most other corners, it's radio silence about this document. However, I warned about the real intent of this document when it was first released in June of 2021. And you can check out that episode. It's episode 186. I go through the national strategy line by line. I have a link up in the show notes of this episode on the website, so visit pasreport.com. But I explained how it's a document that doesn't do anything in regard to domestic terrorism. It's not really about domestic terrorism. It's about targeting political opposition. It's about declaring any type of government criticism or any type of government dissent as extremism. I warned about the far-reaching consequences that this document will have on our political system, and we are now witnessing the results, because the national strategy ushers in a new authoritarian period, something that our founders wanted us to prevent, but we've allowed it to happen. We've taken normal and long-standing political positions and allowed the government to declare them as extremists. Just look around. Listen to the officials. It's not like they've been hiding it. It's not like this is behind the scenes. They've been pretty abrupt. They've been upfront about it. And I explained how this document violates our civil liberties and opens the door for even worse government abuses than we've already witnessed and been subjected to over the last couple of decades. The national strategy undermines the entire intent of the system, everything our founding fathers fought for. It undermines our liberty and the freedom to exercise those liberties. And all you have to do is just read the document. It's 32 pages? Look at the terminology throughout the document. It's never defined. It's intentionally left vague because the bureaucrats in power can apply it any way they see fit, and that's the intent. Take how they say, anyone who expresses anti-government or anti-authority sentiment have the potential to be domestic violent extremists. They never define what constitutes anti-government or anti-authority sentiment. And I want to remind the audience that it doesn't say anti-American sentiment. You can bash the country all day long. Just look at the anti-American, anti-Israel protesters that openly chant death to America and call for intifada here in the United States. See, according to the national strategy, that's fine and protected under the First Amendment. However, are you aware that the mildest criticism of government could land you on a watch list? The mildest pushback of any government policy could put you on some type of watch list. It could put you on the government's radar. And I explained how they intentionally never define things and words like incitement. That even if you're doing nothing wrong, you're just expressing your political beliefs, you could be targeted for incitement based on what you say or what you post on social media. I explored each of the 4 pillars in the national strategy, where in each pillar it talks about what the government will do in order to prevent domestic terrorism. I explained how Pillar 4 is where we see the attempted criminalization of widely accepted political beliefs. Now, while the Biden administration is the one that published the national strategy, it was never really about him. It's always about the bureaucracy. That's what it comes down to. I constantly remind the audience that it's the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy will remain long after any one person. Our country is much bigger than just one person. Whether it's a Trump, whether it's a Biden, no matter who it is, they're going to come and go. But the bureaucracy remains. That's why we're supposed to be the ones that put pressure on the system to make sure that the bureaucracy isn't abusing its power. Unfortunately, we have so many lemmings here in the United States that they willingly surrender their liberty to the bureaucracy. And my warnings fell on deaf ears. Most people are unaware that this document even exists. Most in the media, and I'm talking about even conservative media out there, many of them ignored this document. They did not give it the attention it deserves, despite the evidence of how their strategy is going to be used against them. Some people brought it up, but not many. And as far as I'm aware, Congress, particularly the subcommittee, the select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government, they have yet to hold a single hearing on the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. Think about that logically. This is the main vehicle that's being used for the government to abuse its power. And when Republicans come out there and they scream about the weaponization of government, they haven't held a single hearing on this document. That's disgraceful, but it's also revealing. It reveals that many in Republican circles have no problem with this document. They're just hoping to get into power so they could use it the way they see fit. It's disgraceful. In any event, we're now 3 years out since this document was first published. And I want to revisit the national strategy. I've done this a bunch of times, but many of you may not be aware. America First Legal just put out 2 press releases, one on June 20th and another on June 21st. They released a whole bunch of documents from the now disbanded Homeland Intelligence Experts Group. This group included the frauds, James Clapper and John Brennan. They were part of this advisory committee that the Department of Homeland Security set up. So today I want to do a deep dive, examine what's happened since the release of the national strategy, what America First Legal uncovered, and where we go from here. So everyone, hang tight, and we'll be back after this short break. Are you prepared for the unexpected? As a former emergency manager, being prepared is not a choice, it's a necessity, and that's where the Wellness Company comes in. Imagine having the peace of mind that you're equipped to handle any medical crisis, from tick bites to the latest pandemic. The Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is your lifeline, packed with essential medications like ivermectin, emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and more. This kit is your ultimate preparedness solution. The Wellness Company's team of renowned medical professionals, including Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and more. They are truth-seeking doctors, and they have designed a kit that sets the gold standard for safety and prevention. Don't wait for the next crisis to strike. Visit twc.health/PAS and use promo code PAS for an exclusive 10% discount just for being a listener of this show. Prepare today, rest easy tomorrow. Use code PAS at checkout. Welcome back, everyone. So let's take a look at all the abuses that have happened under the national strategy since it's been released in June of 2021. And it's not really hard. I mean, you don't really need to dig deep and do tons of research to find these abuses. Shortly after the national strategy was released, remember the Department of Justice school board memo that targeted parents, where school board meetings were now going to get threat tags and the FBI would conduct surveillance on those attending and complaining at school board meetings just because you're unhappy and dissatisfied with what your children are being taught? It wasn't long after the national strategy that we had the announcement of the Disinformation Governance Board by Secretary Mayorkas and that loon. I can't recall the name off the top of my head, but the loon that did the whole song and dance. And this Disinformation Governance Board was nothing more than a ministry of truth. We are the government, do what we say. We will monitor your communications, and it's an attempt to control what Americans can see, what we could hear, what we could say, to control thoughts, right? We see this throughout the Department of Homeland Security with the whole misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Malinformation being the most terrifying because malinformation is defined as information that is true but can cause harm, and so the government must come in and censor that information. And this goes to the CISA director, Jen Easterly, her idea of cognitive infrastructure, that controlling our thoughts, our cognitive thoughts should be placed under critical infrastructure protection, where the government plays a much larger role working with the social media companies and other corporations to control the supply and demand of information that's online, which is found directly in the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. Now, the Disinformation Governance Board, the Ministry of Truth, was disbanded because of the pushback they received. But again, they don't really disband these things. They just rebrand it as something else. We saw the FBI Catholic memo, right? That traditional Catholics, because of their positions on the idea of gender and traditional families, because they may want to hear a mass in Latin, well, they are a potential domestic terrorist. And so the Richmond product stated that churches should be infiltrated, that they should be able to recruit informants from people that attend church so that they could spy on their neighbors. Think about that logically. The FBI director, Christopher Wray, said that that's not really happening. Once he found out about the Richmond product, he immediately halted it and launched an internal investigation, but that wasn't really true. Still don't know what's going on with that internal investigation. But we know that it actually was exercised, that it was taking place, that this program did take off. We know that treasures were infiltrated in California and either Washington or Oregon. So we see the abuses. We see the Southern Poverty Law Center running the DOJ and giving the intelligence analysis to the law enforcement agencies because the Southern Poverty Law Center was the basis for the Richmond product. We also know that the Southern Poverty Law Center is the one that declared Moms for Liberty an anti-government extremist organization and called for the FBI to monitor them. And the FBI is monitoring Moms for Liberty. They monitor Moms for Liberty in the same fashion that they monitor white supremacist groups. So we see these abuses routinely occurring. We see that MAGA now has its own threat tag through the FBI. We see companies sending tons of data back to the feds, credit card purchases from Dick's Sporting Goods and Bass Pro Shops. Now, before I get to what America First Legal uncovered, I want to set it up for you. Because again, this was all predictable. I laid it out. I laid out pillar by pillar how the government's going to abuse the power. On September 19, 2023, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas announced the creation of the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group. This group was included both James Clapper and John Brennan, two disgraced, at least they should be disgraced individuals who have no basis speaking about anything within government, intelligence, and law enforcement. They should not be on TV. Both of these men should be in prison for committing perjury before Congress. They lied to Congress. They interfered in our elections. It's under their leadership that Americans were being spied on. They both abused their power. John Brennan's CIA literally spied on sitting members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and their staffs. Yet there was never any accountability, which tells you everything you need to know. Both played a critical role in the Trump-Russian collusion hoax, interfering in the 2016 election, undermining the new administration as it came in. They dragged the country through hell for a couple of years, despite knowing that there was literally no connection between the Trump campaign and Russia. Then in 2020, they were part of the 51 or 52 quote-unquote intelligence experts, they are not experts, that deemed the Hunter Biden laptop as Russian disinformation, swaying the 2020 election, having a major impact. You know, everyone screams about election interference by foreign entities. What about election interference by the bureaucracy? How's about that? Spying on people, leaking classified information, illegally unmasking Americans, yet no accountability for their actions. They continue to go out there, push their propaganda. It's so disheartening to see. Now, American First Legal sued, saying that this group was unconstitutionally formed. They actually won the lawsuit. The administration was forced last month to disband this group. As part of the lawsuit, the Department of Homeland Security has to release all documents pertaining to the group's activities. And what they found and released, it doesn't surprise me in the least bit. And the reason it doesn't surprise me in the least bit is because before I get to the documents that they released, I want to play a brief sound clip of what I said on June 23rd, 2021, when the national strategy was first released. Take a listen. And then you go to page 21. This really troubles me, and it also annoys me. The document talks about recruiting individuals, families, and local communities in order to prevent domestic terrorism. Prior to COVID, this would have been a harmless statement to a certain degree. But given everything that we've witnessed over the last year and a half, this is no longer the case. When I appeared on Tucker, I brought up the Vermont governor. Some people reached out to me. They didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So let me explain it. Last Thanksgiving, you had Republican Governor Phil Scott, who was imploring people not to have Thanksgiving celebrations because of coronavirus. And that when children return to school after Thanksgiving break, the schools will ask the children to tell on their parents and let the school know if they had these celebrations, if anyone from outside their household celebrated Thanksgiving with them, essentially turning children into narcs against their own parents. That really happened. And he wasn't the only one. You had the governor of Washington, Kate Brown, encourage citizens to call the police on their neighbors if their neighbors had more than 6 people in their home. You had Comrade de Blasio. He called on New Yorkers to take a picture of anyone who violates social distancing and lockdown orders and send it to the government so they could be identified and punished. Essentially, they want to turn us into a nation of snitches, where citizens turn on other citizens. You know where else they did this? They did this in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, where children were encouraged to tell their teachers if their parents said anything negative about Saddam Hussein's regime. Now, obviously, we're not Saddam Hussein's Iraq, but I am using it as an example because how long before we get there? These are the tactics used in a police state. These are not the tactics you use in a free society. But now they want to recruit individuals and families to serve as spies for the government. So not only are you going to have the corporate entities that are going to be the government's eyes and ears, they want to recruit ordinary citizens to be the government's eyes and ears as well. And then you have all these morons on the internet that act like they're internet detectives. That's not going to end well. Trust me on that. Well, it turns out that analysis was spot on because now we have documented evidence on how that's exactly what they were attempting to do. So let's dive into the findings from the documents released by American First Legal. And these documents, they shed light on the operations of the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group. This advisory committee discussed strategies for how the Department of Homeland Security should ramp up intelligence collection nationwide on all Americans. And it includes attempting to get into local communities in a non-threatening way. Interestingly, although the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group was officially announced in September 2023, they had already been meeting for about 4 months prior to that. And during a September meeting, they addressed, quote, collection posture and associated challenges, end quote. A member from the Department of Homeland Security expressed frustration over the lack of a mandate for state and local partners to collect information. And so this led to limited access to intelligence and analysis. And this is the whole problem. It's not necessarily the law enforcement component that's the threat. It's the intelligence and analysis portion that is the threat. The discussion highlighted that support for this mission had increased significantly after January 6th by department and politics, but DHS's authority to engage in intelligence collection is limited. It's constrained by the Constitution and federal law. And they don't like that, right? The Constitution is an obstacle. It's an inconvenience to what they're looking to do. They brought up the 9/11 See Something, Say Something campaign, and they said that it was a failure. It was a failure because Americans are reluctant to report on each other. You know, Americans, we don't really want to be a nation of snitches. We don't want to turn in our neighbors, even though that's exactly what the government wants us to do. You have one attendee who was part of this group that posed the question, how do we get into local communities in a non-threatening way? How do people safely report a concern about their neighbors? In response to that, another person asked if there was an ambiguous approach they could take to gathering community information. And the meeting notes reveal a discussion about reclassifying political dissent as a public health crisis. See, again, understand this all ties into the national strategy. Dissent, which is a long-standing tradition here in the United States, that we just don't sit there and do whatever the government says or wants us to do, that it's up to us to ask questions to push back. So dissent is now going to be classified as a public health crisis. And one speaker proposed reclassifying concerning behavior into the public health's catcher's mitt, they called it, so that, quote, mothers and teachers feel comfortable reporting concerns. Essentially, what the Brannon-Clapper Intelligence Group suggested was using public health narratives to encourage mothers and teachers to turn in their children or students to the federal government. Who else did that? Saddam Hussein. That was Saddam Hussein's Iraq. That's exactly what they did. And that's why I played you the sound clip from June of 2021 when I first analyzed this document and I brought up that exact reference. See, when the Department of Homeland Security lacks capabilities, when it can't convince individuals to report their own children, they get upset, they get mad, they get angry. Because they believe that you are too dumb, that you are too stupid to know what's in your interest. You are too stupid to be trusted to do the right thing in American society, and therefore these power-hungry elites, they must be the ones to have the control, to make the decisions, to determine our destinies. That's what they believe. And if they can't convince people to rat each other out, well, then they turn to corporate America as a resource. And again, that's what the newly released documents show, that they're going to use corporate America to release information. Well, that's been happening. Again, this is pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3 of the national strategy. We see it clearly. Corporate America has been weaponized against the American people, and most Americans don't even know it. You have other documents and communications that reveal that the Biden administration classifies individuals as potential violent extremists, especially those who support President Trump, who are in the military, or who are religious. Now, following the events of January 6th, I want to state this clearly because I think it's so important. You had this pathetic general, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, screaming about white rage, saying he wanted to get to the root of white rage in our military. And both him and Secretary Austin wanted to get into the extremism that existed within our military. After 2 years of investigation, they found that actually, no, there's not extremism in the military. In fact, those in our military have more of an open mind than the broader society. That those in the military are much more accepting, open, and tolerant than in our society. And yet here we have these bunch of fools, these power-hungry elitists, these criminals that are saying, well, maybe those that served in the military, well, they're more likely to be domestic violent extremists, totally undermining the sacrifice that those in the military make day in, day out. See, under the Brennan-Clapper approach to national security, if all else fails, well, let's just use military, faith, political support. Let's use those as pretexts to profile and spy on individuals. Now, what makes this an even big deal is when you look at the images over the weekend of a whole bunch of Hamas supporters in Los Angeles attempt to prevent people from entering a synagogue, calling for Jews. And yet they say the real threat is traditional Catholics? Is parents at school board meetings? Is mothers concerned about what their children are learning, that those are the real threats? Those that may support the former president? When you have other people chanting death to America, it really is astonishing. But it's not surprising. It's not. And Americans need to wake up because this has severe implications. Implications that if we just sit around and this document remains, if the national strategy stays in place, we will one day regret it. And I'll talk more about that when we get back from this quick break. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So we've been unpacking the disturbing findings from documents released by American First Legal regarding the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group. But now let's connect the dots because these incidents are a direct result of the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism. I want to talk about what it means for Americans, our Constitution, and our civil liberties because too many people are ignoring this. Where are all the civil libertarians out there? Where is the ACLU? Where are all the conservatives that warn about government overreach? Where are they? Because this strategy has laid the groundwork for the expansion of the surveillance state that we're witnessing today. From the outset, I warned that this document was not just about addressing genuine threats. They don't care about genuine threats. It was always about targeting political opposition and curbing dissent to the almighty state. We see this. And the newly revealed activities of the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group, they confirm everything. And the group's been disbanded, but make no mistake, the individuals involved, the John Brennans, the James Clappers, they're going to continue their efforts to target political opposition. They're not going to pull back. They're going to continue to charge political opposition, arrest them, anyone they deem a threat to the bureaucracy's power. This group, it'll be rebranded as something else. You see the increasing intelligence collection on Americans day in, day out. Just to report the other day that you're getting your mail looked at. That images of the mail you're receiving are being taken, being shared with law enforcement. For what purpose? They talk about local community engagement. They're trying to normalize people spying on each other. See, it's too annoying, too inconvenient for the government to actually have to show evidence, go to a court, get a judge to approve a warrant. That's too much to ask. So instead, they want to turn us into a nation of rats, all in an attempt to put a chill in the air. Reduce resistance to government power. That's why they want to infiltrate communities. That's why they want it to encourage American citizens to report on each other. Just like every other authoritarian regime throughout history, every single oppressive regime has done. Because that's what it is. When you see tactics like that, that's not a free society anymore. And they saw the success they had with COVID. They saw how they were able to successfully control the messaging, the flow of information, because they declared it a public health crisis. And if you look at the national strategy, you'll see the words public health littered throughout as a way to justify these extraordinary measures under the guise of keeping us safe. But it has nothing to do about our safety. And if you believe it's about safety, then you're an idiot. There's nothing I could do to change your mind. Okay, this is about stripping away dissent, making it easier to suppress and control people. By framing behaviors as public health issues, the government's going to attempt to bypass constitutional protections, and they have. They've done exactly that. They've implemented these intrusive surveillance measures. There's hardly any public scrutiny, and they know even if people are outraged, that outrage is going to be short-lived, right? I mean, just look at school board meetings again. People were upset at what their children were learning in schools, and so they started to attend these school board meetings en masse. Packed. Standing room only. A few years later, a couple of years later, well, the school board meetings are still attended better than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But they're nowhere near the standing room only that they once were a couple of years ago. Because again, this is part of the problem with Americans. We feign outrage, we get all worked up, but they could just wait us out. Because they know that sooner or later we'll get bored and we'll chase another shiny object eventually. And that's the sad part, right? And the implications for us are profound. The erosion of civil liberties happening before our eyes. It's under the radar, but it's happening before our eyes. Masked by language of national security and public health and keeping us safe. Our right to free speech, supposed to be protected by the First Amendment, under direct assault when even mild government criticisms can land you on their radar screens. The vagueness of terms like anti-government and anti-authority sentiment, broad interpretation of those, easily could be misused by those in power, and we've been witnessing that occur. What baffles me is how so many of the people of the United States are okay with this. And while those on the left of the political spectrum support these efforts because they despise Trump so much, I mean, I laid out the categories of Trump derangement syndrome. I encourage you on the left. You need to rethink your position. You need to rethink it now when it concerns the national strategy, because it can easily be used against you in the next Republican administration whenever it comes about. See, this isn't about politics to me. It's not about political ideology. It's not about Democrat or Republican, conservative or progressive or anything like that. We should all be calling for the disbandment of any program that's been developed through the national strategy. We should all be calling for the national strategy to be rescinded immediately. Because our Constitution, the bedrock of our republic, is designed to protect us from this overreach. The Fourth Amendment, which guards against unreasonable searches and seizures, it's being circumvented by those wishing to expand surveillance measures. And we continue to see this persistent push to expand government authority, and it's unlawful, it's unconstitutional, and you better wake up and realize that. Because if we realize that now, we could actually potentially make the changes that are necessary to maintain a free society. If we don't realize it, then sooner or later we will realize it, but it will be too late to do anything about it. Because they want to sow the seeds of division. They want you to mistrust your fellow Americans, your neighbors, your parents, or your children. It's a gross misuse of power, and it undermines everything our founders stood for. As Americans, you should be outraged. And yet there's so many okay with the gradual erosion of our civil liberties. Why? Because you get to purchase products at a store? Because you get to go and doom scroll on your smartphone for hours on end and look at stupid videos that mean absolutely nothing? The elites justify it that the new measures are necessary for our safety. But ask ourselves, at what cost? What are we giving up in the process? And how much have we given up? The national strategy for countering domestic terrorism. This is the biggest threat to our freedoms. And we have to hold our government and all these officials accountable. We should never compromise our constitutional rights under any circumstance whatsoever. And free societies come with risks. I would much rather live with the risks in a free society than live in a police state where they try and eliminate risks. I encourage every one of you to share this episode with others, because this is an issue that will determine whether we remain a free society or whether the free society we once knew is gone forever. Remember what Ben Franklin said, that those willing to surrender their liberty for temporary security deserve neither liberty nor security. And understand that the security that you are supposed to get is simply an illusion at best. John Adams warned us that liberty once lost is lost forever. It's up to we the people, not up to the bureaucratic elites. It's up to us to ensure that our government remains a servant of the people, not a master over them. And that's on all of us. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, Please give the PAS Report a 5-star rating and take 30 seconds to write a review on any podcast platform that allows it, particularly Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and share this episode. Share it with your family and friends and on social media. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.